There's a statistic from U.S. Military Affairs. No American who served in combat in World War II is under the age of 91. So it's a small breed. It's a not to be negative at all, but there's a smaller group of guys like this around. And that's what makes Nick so special, right? He's not only is he still alive, but he's still very articulate, he's still sharp, he still has this tremendous memory. We should value that because there's only so many people like that around that were part of this event that shaped the modern world as we know it, our world as we know it. And it's important to remember those guys and to get these guys on video and to remember their stories as best we can. Aside from just honoring my grandfather and for honoring my family, it's not necessarily about that. The broader thing is it's for everybody to soak up what he says and to learn lessons from what he says and to remember this event that is so grand that very few group of Americans are still around to tell about today. We'll start with the toughest question first, Papu. Tell us your full name and age.
Right now?
Right now, yeah, right now.
Full name and age.
Yes, sir. Full name
Nicholas Michael Alexander, 92 years old.
What do you recall about the day that Roosevelt declared that the United States would be entering the war?
We heard about the war on the radio.
A date which will live in infamy.
Most of the men and the boys, I should say the boys, we were young guys, 17, 18 years old, anxious to go to war. And the principal, who was a wise guy, said, look, your time is coming. Finish high school and then you can go.
Talk about a little bit of the military, United States military induction process. You got to choose kind of like a collegiate entrance sort of a program, right? They were going to send you to basic training and then you were going to be able to go to college. What was the name of that program and how did it ultimately wind up getting terminated?
The Army had a program called Army Specialized Training Program. Well, I chose that. And they said, well, if in that event, you'll take basic training, 13 to 14 weeks of basic training, and then we'll send you off to a university somewhere. I think it was Harry Hopkins who was the man who told Roosevelt they should have a program like that. And it saved the universities because the universities, all the men were leaving. Primarily the only ones left were women. So the program persisted. Roosevelt agreed, and the program persisted for a period of time, but it collapsed during my basic training, and I was unable to go there.
On the track of basic training, tell us about that experience. You went to Camp Barkley in Abilene, Texas.
Basically, they tried to get you in good shape, and by doing that, we went on a lot of hikes. In addition to that, there were a variety of various other things that you did. A course called infiltration course, in which you crawl for about 100 yards, and there was live ammunition shot over your head. And then in addition to that, there were so-called obstacle courses that we had to do about every other week or so. And this meant all kinds of physical things, jumping, catching onto a rope. I kind of liked it because I'd played sports and I was in reasonably good shape, but it was a hassle.
A little bit later on, you were sent to a replacement depot. Now, what was the nickname that these replacement depots were given, and what was the significance of the location you were at?
Repel Depot was the nickname for replacement depot. And I went there after I had got additional training in Missouri, and it was near Pittsburgh on the Ohio border. And I went into Warren, Ohio on one occasion with a friend, one of my colleagues, who asked me to go along because his girlfriend needed a date. Well, we get to Warren, Ohio, and her girlfriend doesn't show up. His girlfriend does, so there I am alone. I get on the bus and go back to Youngstown, Ohio. But the interesting thing about it was, I didn't know this at the time, but I married a woman from Warren, Ohio.
You embarked at a Camp Shanks in New Jersey.
That's correct.
And how was the ride getting across the Atlantic in the SS George Washington? And also, more specifically on a technical level, why did it take you guys so long to get across?
The reason it took us 2 weeks to get to, we got to actually Liverpool in England, the ship was trying to avoid submarines. So instead of a trip that would have normally taken 5 days, it took us about 2 weeks. So that wasn't a very pleasant trip, except the biggest poker games, the biggest poker game that I had ever seen were on that, I wasn't involved, but on that ship. And it was the enlisted men that were having the big poker game.
So the ship ultimately, the SS George Washington, I should say, it ultimately ported into Liverpool. And the joke that became semi-famous that the English citizens had used towards the American soldiers, that the Americans are oversexed, overpaid, and over here. But you actually never heard that come from the mouth of any English person. No, why do you think that is?
No, I didn't. I heard that much later. In fact, even maybe after the war, I forget when I first heard it. No, the British were glad to see us in many ways. They were glad to see us because we were going to do some fighting.
In July of '44, you embarked out of Southampton to cross the Channel. Talk about the condition of that ship and what it was like just landing on Utah Beach. Was it very obvious that a very large-scale battle had occurred, you know, a little over a month and a half prior?
It was a short ride. I forget exactly, just going across the channel. And they made pretty much of a direct route to hit the beach. We finally get close to the shores in France. And the ship doesn't go all the way up to the beach. We have to get down on a smaller ship called a Higgins boat. And that took us to the shore. And when we got to the shore, the boat we were on didn't go all the way up. He stopped a little bit short, so we had to wade through water a little bit. And this was Utah Beach. When we landed, we were all replacements, essentially. We weren't assigned to any unit. It was a numbers game, you know. If X division needed 50 men, they would go down the list and call 50 names. And when my turn came, I went into Company A of the 53rd Armored Infantry Battalion of the 4th Armored Division. Now the fighting had been going on for over a month, so there had been a beachhead established, but we hadn't gone inland very far. We were still in what was known as the hedgerows, which was tough fighting, really tough fighting.
What were some of the things that you carried in your pack? Did you have anything that was of any personal value? Do you have any pictures of any family members at home or anything along those lines?
Nothing really personal of any value, and I don't think, well, wait, I should say this, no. No, I did have something. My mother was religious, of course, gave me a medal, a St. Nicholas medal to carry, and I did have that.
When I envisioned this project and envisioned doing this documentary, I had been threatening to do it for so many years. And that was one of the things. I was like, I got to get a shot of me, or some shots of me at least, at the World War II monument, walking around and just talking about how I feel about Nick and how I feel about his story and how it exemplifies the American dream. His dad, George, and his wife, Bella, they came to Ellis Island. They came from Greece. They didn't speak a lick, you know, not a word of English. That's what's so crazy about it. They produced these incredible people. It just exemplifies how important immigration is for this country. If immigrants are capable of producing people like Nick, who go on to fight in some of our biggest wars and work as professors and do tremendous research and lead really successful lives and normal lives, you know, why are we shutting them out? And should we kind of be reviewing our stance on those people and reviewing our history a little bit? And it's also wild to think about the timeline of it all, right? I mean, he was younger than me. I'm 22 now. You know, he was 19 and he saw all these things and did all these crazy, incredible things at just that age. I think it's shaped who he is today. You mentioned that on our meeting on Tuesday that you guys were moving so fast that it was said that the war would be over before Christmas. Well, that's not what happened. You wound up getting into Germany the day after, and Bastogne the day after Christmas. Give us a brief synopsis of that battle and the part you played, and also what made it so difficult, what made it such a challenging operation.
It was a real blunder by so-called military intelligence. The Germans were accumulating all this massive force to attack during the Battle of the Bulge. They were going to do in 1944, winter of 44, what they had done 3 years earlier. They were going to go around the Maginot Line through the Ardennes. We didn't know how far the Germans had advanced or they had broken through or anything. We were just told to get up there quickly, and our objective was to relieve Bastogne because the 101st Airborne Division was surrounded there. When we were in Arlon, we were stopped there long enough so we got off, and some of us went into this tavern and this bar. There was a woman in there, a middle-aged woman, who spoke pretty good English, and she seemed very confident that the Germans were gonna go all the way to Antwerp. She said, you know, they came through here 4 years ago. Nobody stopped them. And hell, I was a young kid. What the hell did I know? I says, well, we've had success before. We're going to stop them, you know. We started attacking, and that was brutal. That was brutal fighting, you know, because it was cold, and the Germans were really putting up a battle. Going into Bastogne, and I mentioned this to you earlier, there were dead GIs in these foxholes. Most 101st Armored guys, 101st Airborne. And there was one young guy that caught my eye. He was stiff, he was dead stiff with his left arm sticking out of the foxhole, and he had a wedding band on his left hand. And I thought to myself, God, what a Christmas message his wife is going to be getting, you know.
Throughout the war, of course, you had a number of extremely close scrapes with death, but the one that kind of stands out to us and everybody else when you tell it, and maybe that might just be because you've told that story more than some of the others, but the story of Leonard Goodman. Talk about that a little bit.
Goodman was the platoon sergeant, and he assigned squad leaders like myself and others to deploy in a certain way going into the town. Well, he's only a few yards from me, and we're approaching this village, and he gets shot, and he was killed. The bullet got him through the head, and it came out on the other side. And gee, when I went over to look at him to see if there was any way to pull him back or anything, he was dead, and part of his brain was coming out the end. He was a terrific guy, you know. But there were other times too that were, you know, where I was in a position and there was somebody behind me and we were being shelled, and for whatever reason, I just got up and moved, and by God, a shell landed right there and hit the guy behind me, and I had to evacuate him. I mean, he was, you know, the shrapnel all over. And I don't know, I mean, that was, you know, that was just luck.
What's your immediate thought to something like that when you see, oh my God, is it just, oh my God, that could have been me, or you just don't really have time, you just kind of keep moving?
You know, Robert, I'll tell you, you subliminally put these things aside, I think, you know. You become desensitized to things like that.
In March of 44, you actually you're part of an effort to help liberate Ohrdruf concentration camp, which was a satellite of Buchenwald. Talk about that experience a little bit.
You know, totally unexpected. You know, we were driving and going across Germany at a pretty good clip, and we got there, and you know, it's all the gore that you've seen or heard about was there. You know, they dug us some pits and just simply shoved the corpses in there. Seeing these people really was really horrendous. But there again, I had become so so hardened about death and destruction and everything. You know, I guess I kind of tended to say, well, that's war. You know.
We'll talk now about some of the medals you received. It's called the Silver Star of Courage.
Silver Star. It's the third highest. There's the Congressional Medal of Honor, Distinguished Medal, Silver Star. Actually, you know, a number of guys could have gotten it, you know, for what they did.
Why did you get it?
I got it because I rescued on a couple of occasions. I rescued guys from no man's land. During the Bulge, there was a guy that was wounded from another company. We were pulling back near these woods, and he couldn't walk. And I said, look, I don't know that I could drag you all that distance. I said, but I'll be back. I'll get help and get you. And he looked at me as if, I don't think he's coming back, you know. So I went back about 200 yards, and I was able to convince a couple of guys to come with me. They should have gotten an award. It's reflex action, Robert. If I were to think about it, I probably wouldn't do it. You know? But you don't, and it's reflex action, really. You know.
Heroism is when one has the ability to save themselves from a dangerous situation, but instead they choose to either stay or go back into the fray for the benefit of others and for the good of others. And Nick didn't even know this guy. He didn't even know this guy, and he went back and chose to save him. Leonard Goodman, that's a story that I think about a lot, and I think about that all the time. There's a sniper somewhere on a roof or in a bell tower, and Goodman is shot and sniped right through the head and is killed immediately. And you just think to yourself, like, well, why wasn't it Nick? They're presumably easy, you know, he wasn't just as easy of a target. He had to be. They were only a couple yards apart, just like you and me. And you just think about that, man, like, wow, like he was that close. It wasn't until so many years later that he and Penny came back to Europe, and they found his grave. They just stumbled upon it. Was kind of by happenstance. And I think that's when it all kind of hit him, right? This is in the mid 80s, early 80s, and he just thought to himself, oh my God, you know, I've got to do all this stuff with my life. I went on to have a family, I went on to have a career, I went to college, I've done all these things, and this poor guy, this young guy has been dead all these years. What can you tell us about the day that you learned we had won the war, and VE Day? What can you tell us about that day?
Well, we were glad. We were happy the war was over. I played some softball. I got pictures of the team, too. Championship softball team in the 53rd
Now point to yourself
Armored Battalion.
Where are you on that?
I'm on the end, over here.
You were the pitcher?
I was the pitcher.
You were bringing it.
And the guy that was the umpire in this one game really cheated. He was cheated for us.
Oh, really? He was a
I
homer?
don't know whether they were betting on it or what. And I think these guys were engineers. They drove up the road to play with us. They played on our field. And hell, there was one play where the guy was obviously safe.
They called him out.
He called him out. What guys? I didn't say anything. He didn't reverse himself either.
That's funny.
His calls were not very favorable for the other team, you know.
How often do you think about the war?
Not as much now as I used to. Right after the war, I thought about it a lot. In fact, I used to dream about it off and on, but as the years go by, I think of it less and less, you know. It's hardwired up there, I think.
There's things that you'll never forget.
Things will never go away, and I used to think about it off and on, but as the days went on, what the heck, you know, I started doing other things. I went to college, had a family, moved, had grandkids, and other things to think about, you know.
What's it like knowing that you were just a part of this huge, humongous historical event? What's that like?
I'm minuscule. So many people died, and young guys that never had a chance. So Lucky.
In a life that has been incredibly eventful, you know, what's next?
We've been lucky.
Yeah.
We've had a great life. We really have. You got to look at it from a positive standpoint. After 90-some years, we're still around, and everything good has happened. One of these days, we may need a lot more help than we've got now, but well, you just keep going. That's all. You know.
Dear Papu, you are truly an amazing individual. What you did for this country and for the world and for your fellow man during the Second World War will never be forgotten. You fought for the destruction of evil and the salvation of humanity. You fought so that we could live long and happy lives free of worry and doubt. Your incredible stories from your experiences in combat have truly moved me and taught me many life lessons. We must learn to value and live our lives to the fullest every day because life is so very delicate. To this day, you live life in an amazing way. You are still very active, social, loving, and your eagerness to learn new things has never been stronger. You are my hero. You are our hero. You are an American hero.